Hey, Weidner, reality check. Hit like and subscribe and all that other stuff. A couple of announcements. One, I am doing a membership. We are doing a membership plan, so you can join. We're not going to stop our content. Still going to be reading from my book and doing my shows and interviews and all that. This is more content and more one-on-one too, so I can talk about alchemy with you and maybe even have private courses and that kind of thing. So it'll be included in the description of how you can join. I hope you do. It'll be fun, and it's not that much money, I don't think. So anyway, and I won't be taking any of the money. It's going to my producer, and it's going to go to people that I want to pay to produce good content. I have a person who is a top cult journalist, and she is just top notch. And I'd love to be able to give her some money to do some investigations into some of the strange cult activity going on in our world today. I'm also sorry to say that I went to my friend Howdy Mikowski and asked him to debate me on the Chicago World's Fair, and unfortunately he declined. I was going to get somebody neutral, I don't know who, to moderate it so that it wouldn't be one-sided or anything. And I still like Howdy, but I just totally disagree with his work. I was going to come to this debate very well prepared. I've been preparing for the debate for a couple of weeks, and I've found many photographs of Jackson Park pre-1891, pre-World's Fair. None of those buildings are there. Same thing with San Francisco. I've looked at pre-1900 panoramic photographs of San Francisco, and the stuff in the World's Fair buildings, those aren't there. Those are all just plaster, fake buildings that were easily would either burn down or get blown down by the wind. And so, and I wanted to debate this because our community now uses the World's Fairs as proof that there was some kind of civilization here in America before the Europeans arrived, and there was a civilization here. I'm not arguing that. There's a lot of very strange things going on concerning Tartaria and the fact that they seem to have buildings everywhere in Japan, China, India, United States, Mexico, Canada, long time ago, thousands of years ago. A lot of the stuff has been destroyed. The stuff in India got destroyed by the British in the Civil War, in the Indian Civil War. The British just bombed that crap out of all these incredible, beautiful temples, destroyed them all. So I just want to make it clear, I do not think that the Tartaria stuff is nonsense. In fact, I think it's vitally important that we look into this. But in looking into it, when we find that some of our research is wrong, you've got to come out and say that it's wrong. That's our duty. And I can tell you that the Chicago World's Fairs and all the World's Fairs are very strange events. So I'm not going to argue that. I have no idea why they would spend all of that money building a bunch of temporary buildings just to have them torn down, a couple months after the fair is over. The waste is just incredible, but this is America in the 1800s, and we had a lot to waste. I mean, we were an extremely wealthy country. We had forests everywhere, and, we were just, and still are, a very wealthy country. So, it's a strange story. It deserves to be looked at, especially the Buffalo World's Fair should be looked at more closely, not because the buildings were there before the fair, but because of the strange events that happened at the World's Fairs. They would imitate slavery, right, in the South. They'd literally have slaves working on a plantation, as a theater. And it's just some strange stuff going on. And that's not what I'm going to talk about today. I just wanted to bring that up because I said that Howdy, who I still consider a friend of mine, declined to debate. I thought we would have a very, very, very vigorous debate. All right. So today I'm going to tackle something really strange. Something I've debated for a while, whether I wanted to do this or not. But then I decided that in a world where it's becoming increasingly clear that the events that we're witnessing are not necessarily what's really going on, I want to use this show to show you that they've been fooling us for a very long time, a very long time. And what I'm going to talk about today is two books that were written. It came out in 2009. This is the first book, Memoirs of Billy Shears. And then a later book came out that is a reduced version of this book called Billy's Back. Okay, I'll show you something very interesting about these two books. Look who the writers are. Look who the guy on top is. Sir Paul McCartney wrote these books. That's this book here. You think that Paul McCartney would have his picture on a book? So Sir Paul McCartney claiming that he's one of the most renowned musicians in the world on a book that he didn't write? I don't think so. One thing we can say about Apple Records, they guard their copyrights. Here's Billy's back. And again, who's the writer? He's not credited on the cover, but only in the inside do we see a picture of him. So what are these two books about? Really, it's just this book. This book is a story of how on September 11th, 1966, if you believe their story, Paul McCartney got in a car accident. He ran a red light. He just picked up a pretty girl who was all excited that Paul McCartney had picked her up, and they ran a red light because they were all looking at each other, and he got hit and killed, decapitated. And this is the story of the replacement. His name is Billy Shepherd. And what he was Brian Epstein, who was the manager of the Beatles. He freaked out when Paul died, and he went and he found, he held a contest, a Paul McCartney lookalike contest, like a few days after Paul McCartney died, and this guy won. And just happened to be also a really, really, really good musician. He could play trumpet and piano and banjo, and he could play like 25 instruments. He was a studio musician, and he was an impersonator, and he would impersonate Paul McCartney on records. He put out a few records before he joined the Beatles, and in those records he played cover songs, and one of them was a Paul McCartney song, and he sounded just like Paul. So Brian Epstein, the manager, came up with this devious idea to replace Paul McCartney with another guy. So this guy immediately went to Kenya, where he got plastic surgery, and since Paul had brown eyes and he had blue eyes, he had to wear brown contacts. His hair, his weave of his hair is exactly the opposite of the old Paul. The old Paul had a round face. This guy's got a long face. He's 4 inches taller than Paul, which is why they had to quit touring at that point. They never toured again because all of the Beatles were all the same height, about 5'11", and this guy's 6'3". So they couldn't never tour again because everyone would notice that suddenly Paul McCartney was a lot bigger and taller. I think the reason that he wrote these books is because he doesn't want his children to get sued. And here's the thing. The original Paul McCartney had sex like a bunny rabbit. And he ended up, when they toured in the United States in 1966, he ended up getting, I think, 3 women pregnant, and they sued him. And but he was gone. He died, on September 11th, 1966, and these trials were all in going through their course. So now we had a new Paul McCartney, And he was not afraid to give a blood sample to show that the kid couldn't be his because it wasn't his. One time he walked into court where he's being sued by a woman, and she walked up to him and she looked at him head to toe and said, "Who the hell are you? This isn't Paul McCartney." And so they fooled us with this. This is the greatest fool job ever. Once you see the difference between how the two look, they look sort of alike, but they don't. There's a huge difference. The original Paul was a very slight person. He didn't have much weight on his frame at all. This guy, he's a big guy. He's a big guy. He says that the hardest thing for him to do was learn how to play bass backwards, left-handed bass, because that's what Paul was, a left-handed bass player. And he was right-handed. And there's actually a 16 millimeter film of the Beatles visiting the Maharishi in India. And you can see Paul in the background playing right-handed guitar, even though he was supposedly left-handed. Also, as a musician, if you watch Paul McCartney, say the Ed Sullivan shows or whatever, he never looks at his bass while he's playing. He's so sure of himself that he never even has to look at where his fingers are. That's how well he knows that bass. The new Paul McCartney, though, he's looking at his bass all the time because he's playing a left-handed bass. It's got to be really hard. Just imagine trying to figure out how to play a guitar the opposite hand, right? He definitely says in the books that the Beatles were part of a operation that a certain group, which I'll just, so I don't get censored, I'll just call T-Stock. Those of you who know what I'm talking about, T-Stock is a high-level organization in England which basically controls the culture. So that Bill Shepherd, AKA Paul McCartney, says in the book that both the Stones and the Beatles were created by T-Stock. And T-Stock did it so the Beatles would be the good guys and the Stones would be the bad guys, and that they were using it for control. Now, the new Paul McCartney, John used to call him, what was it? Fall, fake Paul. So he called him Fall. Several times you can see John Lennon calling him Fall. So Fall, we'll call him Fall. So Fall one day was talking to Brian Epstein, and Brian Epstein was being really open with him about, the creation of the Beatles and all of that. And Fall said, well, what is the whole purpose of the Beatles? And Brian Epstein, without missing a beat, said, to destroy religion. So just saying. So he says very clearly that, and he also says that the Grand Masons of Freemasonry of England approved him replacing Paul McCartney. Now, here's another thing that needs to be said. So we know the Beatles put all these clues on the covers of their album indicating that Paul was dead. And they did that he says, on purpose. So if we look at the cover of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, we can see four of the four original Beatles with their haircuts and their Beatles suits staring sadly at a grave. And the grave has a left-handed bass. It's shaped like a left-handed bass. The new Beatles are in the center of the shot. And they all have beards and they all look different now. In Sgt. Pepper's, where they started looking different. Why? Well, because they had a new guy and they had to make themselves all look different to distract from you noticing that wasn't really the Paul McCartney. If you look on Sgt. Pepper's, you'll also see above Paul, there's a hand, a palm, like right there. That's Paul M, Paul McCartney, Palm. That's probably a nickname that John had for Paul McCartney, because John always had nicknames for everybody. Okay, I'm getting there. There's in the film Magical Mystery Tour, Ringo's drum, it has on it very clearly the three Beatles. The three Beatles, it says very clearly. In the movie Imagine documentary about John Lennon, John has George Harrison over to visit at his Dakota apartment in New York. And Yoko is there, and she says, "Oh, George, I have some really special tea I just got in from Japan. Would you like to have a cup?" And George says yes. And so they move into the kitchen where Yoko's making the tea, and they each get their cup of tea. And John sips and goes, "Yoko's making tea for the Fab Four." That was their name, the Fab Four. And George corrects him, goes, "Fab Three," right? And John looks really surprised that George corrected him. So there's also other weird things about the Paul McCartney replacement. Two Beatles were attacked violently. A man broke into George Harrison's house and stabbed him almost to death. It just barely missed his liver. And of course, John Lennon was supposedly gunned down in New York City right outside the Dakota apartments. I don't know what those deaths have to do with, this great switch that they did, but, yeah. If you look at, if you remember, Paul McCartney got married, his wife Linda died, and he got remarried to Heather Mills, right? And if you remember in their divorce, Heather got on TV and said, "I know something about Paul McCartney that will shock the world." And what, Heather, tell us. Well, she can't, because she had to sign an agreement to get money. And so then the question becomes, is this fraud? Is this fraud? And I think it's a good question. Is this fraud? Did the Beatles commit fraud on us? And I actually think they did. And I actually think that Apple Records could actually have a class action lawsuit against it for fraud. I mean, how many people thought they were buying Paul McCartney records, not knowing that it wasn't Paul McCartney? And then we've come up with the very last thing. Did Paul McCartney die? Okay, so they put clues all over the record albums that Paul was dead. And then they denied that those clues were there, but they're clearly there. So then you say, okay, so then the Beatles are actually, the group behind the Beatles actually wants us to think that Paul is dead. So then that raises the question, did Paul die, or was he just replaced? This guy he could read music. He could play like 20 instruments. He was extremely well-versed in music. The old Paul couldn't read music. He could just really play the bass. So that really begs the question, did Paul McCartney just go retire somewhere? And they put in a new guy who would reinvigorate the band, which is exactly what he did. So the Beatles put out 10 albums, 5 with the original Paul and 5 with the new Paul. And there's no doubt the last 5 were 10 times better than the first 5. The first 5 were just tangy, twangy love songs. They weren't deep. The musicology wasn't there, but the last 5 were like masterpieces. So I think that the greatest thing that ever happened to the Beatles was that this guy came and replaced Paul, whether he died or not. And it's a fascinating story. And once you begin looking at pictures of both Pauls, after a while, you'll know immediately which one's which. The new Paul has a really strong chin, square chin. The old Paul had a very weak chin. The old Paul had a round face, almost like a cherub. And the new Paul had also, as I remember, there's also it's at a party, and George Harrison and his wife are arriving at the party, and Paul is there ready to greet them, the new Paul. And George Harrison's wife looks at Paul and goes, "Hello, Bill." It was very clear that she said it. And so they called him Bill. And like I say, his hair is parted wrong. the old Paul parted this way and the new Paul parts this way. And I think Pete Townsend of The Who noticed that. And that's why he included that line, a parting on the left is now a parting on the right, because it was parting on the left, but now it's parting on the right. If you look at some of the songs that the new Paul wrote, Two of Us, that's about him and the old Paul. Hello, goodbye. I say hello and you say goodbye. I don't know why you say goodbye. I say hello, right? So he's saying the old one had to say goodbye and he's the new one and he's saying hello. So I don't know why you had to say goodbye, right? You don't know why you had to go, but I'm here now. He wrote a song called I Will. Well, his name's William. So he is, I will. If you want me to, I will. That's how the line goes. So over and over, we see this. And the fact that these books are out with his picture as the author. Oh, by the way, they're saying these are fiction to get by with being able to tell you the whole story. But the book, especially if you're going to read read this one because it's much more in depth. And he leaves clues all through that you can check up that probably only the guy that made the records would know about these clues. And it's just a dang interesting story and subject. And I think that there's a lot of this switching going on, by the way. It's a corporation. The Beatles are a corporation. That's all they were. They're still a corporation. So it's just how corporations roll. They don't want to stop producing when they've got something that's, hotter than hell. And so they just switched out the old Paul for a new Paul and got a great deal in the process. So anyway, that's all I got to say. I think it's just a weird story. I wanted to bring it up. I know younger people probably going, Paul, who? But people a little bit older will know it and remember the whole Paul is fake and all that they somehow, the Beatles got away with it. And very strange. Anyway, this is Reality Check, and that was a reality check. And I'm Jay Weidner, and hit like and subscribe and tell your friends. And I'm sorry if you're a Paul McCartney fan. I didn't mean to, make you feel bad or anything. It's just that he's still very talented. The new Paul McCartney. In fact, he's much more talented than the old Paul McCartney. But the old Paul McCartney is not the new Paul McCartney. They did switch him out, and he admits it. All right. See you later.